So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Continue to enjoy your meal while we continue with today's summit. My name is Corey Walker. I'm the Dean of the Wake Forest University School of Divinity, the Wake Forest Professor of the Humanities, the Director of the Program in African American Studies, and also the PI on this Mellon Initiative, Environmental and Epistemic Justice Initiative. It's both an honor and indeed a deep and critical responsibility to host this gathering. This gathering that brings together scholars, students, activists, policymakers, community leaders from across North Carolina, united by a shared vision and a shared commitment to justice, both environmental, epistemic, and beyond. We're gathering at a moment defined by the term polycrisis, a condition in which multiple interlocking crises, including climate change, environmental degradation, socio-political instability, racialized inequality, and epistemological fragmentation, intensify and compound one another. In such a context, the imperative for environmental justice becomes not one of only a singular issue, but a more urgent, complex nexus of issues that we must confront collaboratively, creatively, and in a committed manner. The quest for environmental justice is not singular. It intersects with other issues we discussed this morning around public health, around economic inequality, racial injustice, and democratic retreat. In an age of cascading crises, environmental justice is not an option, it is our very mission. It is essential that we continue to ask those most pressing questions: who is most harmed by a lack of environmental justice? Who has a voice in decision-making? Who controls the knowledge that shapes policy and perception? And crucially, whose knowledge is ignored or erased? This is where epistemic justice becomes essential. It compels us to interrogate those knowledge discourses in environmental discourse that count and those that are marginalized, those that are legitimated and those that are excluded, and those frameworks that intentionally exclude ways of thinking and ways of knowing that increase possibilities of justice in the world. At Wake Forest University, we believe in a holistic vision of justice, one that does not separate ecological degradation from structural iniquities, from the ways in which we include more knowledge and ways of knowing about the world and human existence across space and time. Environmental justice and epistemic justice are inseparable. We cannot solve the climate crisis if we silence indigenous knowledge, disregard frontline communities, or fail to confront the legacies of colonialism and environmental racism that are embedded in our cognitive, political, economic, and cultural systems. This summit invites us to engage in a rigorous reflection and conversation on these interwoven streams of justice. It challenges us to consider how an academic institution can serve not merely as a site of critique, but as a platform for decolonial, collaborative, and reparative knowledge practices, and practices that then extend out throughout the world. And it asks us, all of us, to consider our ethical obligations in our work, in our commitments, in a particularly precarious historical moment. It is truly a distinct honor to welcome to this gathering a visionary leader who has shaped the history and future of justice in America and beyond. An exemplary individual who uniquely combines quests for environmental justice with those quests for inclusive and more elaborate systems of knowing that rely on and draw from the deep wells of human traditions. The Reverend Dr. Benjamin Franklin Chavis Jr. is a pioneering civil rights leader, faith leader, author, environmental justice advocate, and most importantly, a dear friend of many of us gathered in this room. As the executive director of the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice in the 1980s, Dr. Chavis famously coined the term environmental racism and led the groundbreaking 1987 report, Toxic Waste and Race, which crystallized and catalyzed the environmental justice movement nationwide. His work made clear the inextricable link between race, place, and environmental harm, a truth that continues to demand our attention and our action. A former youth organizer for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and a member of the Wilmington 10, and a deep advocate for the establishment of African American studies, not only at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, but across the nation. Dr. Chavis has spent his life on the front lines of justice, faith, and freedom. He has served as the executive director and CEO of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and currently serves as president of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, and continues to be a powerful voice at the intersection of human rights and environmental stewardship. Today, as we gather among friends to learn from one another, to hear one another, and to explore the deep intersections between environmental and epistemic justice. There is no more fitting guide to help us interrogate how knowledge, policy, and power intersect, and how we must boldly and ethically act in response. Please join me in welcoming a trailblazer for justice, a champion for community, and a prophetic voice of our times, the Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis. Thank you, brother.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, we want to thank God Almighty. We want to thank the Creator for the opportunity to be together today as sisters and brothers of one human family. Dr. Walker, thank you for words of introduction, and thank all of you for being at this important symposium. I'm glad I came in to hear a little bit of a couple of the panels. I'm pleased and honored to be in your presence. And to all the previous speakers who spoke out of their lived experiences, out of their academic training, out of their witnessing the whole subject matter of why we have an environmental justice movement today in America and throughout the world. I can't think of a better place and state to have this symposium than North Carolina. I'm a North Carolina native. Proud of it. In 1982, before I get into Warren County, I just want to recognize Reverend Bill Kearney is here. Reverend Kearney from Warren County, let's give him a hand. I have about 22 minutes, so I don't want to spend too much time on something that's not on the subject. But to me, to answer the question of where do we go from here, I just want to make sure we know where we are here, where we are today. And I believe that where we are today is a result of where we've been in the past. in my civil rights career, I've been arrested 6 to 7 times, mainly in North Carolina, some in South Carolina, some in Virginia, some in Alabama, some in Georgia. So in 1982, after serving in the North Carolina prison system for most of the 1970s as a member of the Wilmington 10, the last thing I wanted to do, Reverend Kennedy, was get arrested again in North Carolina. But when I found out that of the 100 counties in North Carolina, Warren County, the most predominantly black county, one of the poorest counties, and the state of North Carolina decided it was going to dig a hole called a landfill and put tons of polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, a very cancer-causing carcinogenic substance, in the middle of this African-American farming rural community. Even today, in 2025, the residents of Warren County mostly get their water from well water. If your water is contaminated, the people are contaminated. If the water is contaminated, the air is polluted. And so, when I heard about this, I couldn't believe it. It was happening all over again. Part of my background before becoming an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, I'm an organic chemist. So I know a little something about the properties of polychlorinated biphenyls. And the life of these poisons doesn't dissipate in a decade, doesn't dissipate in a century. It would take over 1,000 years for polychlorinated biphenyl to become just a harmless inorganic substance. So I would not be in favor of putting that landfill in any community. But it was put in Warren County because Warren County was targeted, because Warren County was discerned to be vulnerable to the wills, not just of the state. And so one night in the Warren County jail, I coined the term environmental racism, 1982. Environmental racism is the deliberate targeting of communities of color, of oppressed communities, like our indigenous native communities. It is racial discrimination in environmental policymaking. It is the attempt to exclude the very communities that suffer from being involved in those policymakings or those acts of remediation. And lastly, environmental racism, like all forms of racism, is ignorance. The truth is, there's but one race, and that's the human race. Before the transatlantic slave trade in the 1500s, there was no concept of race. There was no use of race. So why would some people in commerce and some people in the church collude to create a hierarchy based on skin color, based on hair texture, based on geography, to determine who was human and who was not human. Because you have to understand the genocide that was committed against people of African descent was done because of the presupposition that they were not human. The genocide that was committed against indigenous people here in America was done because of the presupposition that they were savages and not human. Thousands of Jews were murdered by the Nazi regime because they were perceived as not being human in the Holocaust. So what can we learn? We can't answer the question where we're going from here if we don't learn from where we've already been. I've been asked in many of these forums, Reverend Chavis, we don't understand the environment, but what is environmental racism? I said, no, you should be asking me, what is racism? You can't understand environmental racism if you don't understand racism. Racism is ignorance. And we need great universities like Wake Forest to help educate and re-educate and stand against the ignorance, not just in this state, not just in this nation, but all over the world. Now, I don't want to raise my voice at y'all, but I'm a preacher. My favorite, Reverend Kennedy said me say this many times, scripture in the Bible is from the Psalms. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. Now, if the earth is the Lord's, and I believe that to be true, that means everything in earth, on earth, is also the Lord's. I heard a little something about genetics when I came in. One of the foremost molecular biologists is a young brother now in Washington, D.C., who is helping to unpack further the human genome. And what they have found thus far, because they haven't finished, is that all people, no matter where you live, no matter what your skin color is, no matter what language you speak, all of us have 98% the same DNA. It's only the 2% variant. So if we are all 98% the same, why can't we get along with one another? Why can't we mutually respect one another? Why can't we live in a world and live in a nation, live in a state, live in a county, live in a community where we affirm the humanity of one another? There are people in the White House right now. And I know I don't want to make Wake Forest lose its funding. But there are people in the White House who are deliberately sowing seeds of division. Because if you go back to when race was first concocted, it was for economic purposes. It was for imperialistic purposes. And same today. When you hear the White House say they're going to dismantle environmental protections, they're quitting the Paris Accords, it's for economic reasons. But it's not just for economic reasons. I think one of the difficulties of answering the question is that sometimes we want a simplistic answer to a complex problem. And so that's why I applaud, Dean, what you've done in terms of having sort of an interdisciplinary discussion, interdisciplinary review and analysis of the complexity of the challenges, but also the complexity of the opportunities. I come out of the civil rights movement, not just in this state. I'm so thankful that I had parents that allowed me to join the movement at an early age. I put my age up, probably illegally, driving since I was 14. And I was driving all over the state, all over the South. And one of the things I witnessed as a teenager was that all people want to have a good life. The problem with racism and the problem with imperialism, the problem with colonialism, the problem with neocolonialism, the problem with Trumpism is that some believe that one group can get ahead, that one group can thrive at the expense of other groups. And then, Dean, call on some religious folks to give theological undergirding justification for it. I don't know how you can be an evangelical. Praise the Lord. And then damn the people the Lord created. The day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered, on April the 4th, 1968, I was working for SCLC. I was a college student at University of North Carolina at Charlotte, chemistry major. I was going to medical school. But I changed my mind on that day. I finished my degree in chemistry, but I went back to school. Because to me, I believe that Dr. King's dream wasn't just a dream for black people. It was a dream for all people. And so a man who's trying to love all people, why would you assassinate him? Why would you demean him? Why would you have people try to break up his family, threaten his house, his home, threaten the movement? That was a very sad day in American history. So I decided then to go back to school, study religion, philosophy. So here I am. I'm 77 years old. I'm one of the OGs up in here, one of the elders. But I'm calling upon all of you to learn from history, not to repeat it. The complexity of environmental injustice, the complexity of climate injustice demands and deserves not only our attention, but demand and deserves our participation, our engagement. I've come today, even though I've kind of initially painted this bleak picture, I've come today not as a pessimist, but an optimist. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about why I'm an optimist, and then we're going to have a good discussion with our dean. I am not willing to give up the future of the world to dictators or people who want to be a dictator. I believe in repentance. I believe in redemption. I believe that God answers our prayers, not just hears our prayers, but answers our prayers. I run into some folks say, but Doc, you know, praying doesn't change anything. That's when the last time you prayed. I run to people all the time and say, we tired of marching. I say, you never march. It's amazing me how people gravitate to what they cannot do rather than stand up on the premise of what we can do, what we should do, and what we will do. After 1982, I really want to thank the women and children of Warren County who stood up against the state, who laid down their bodies on the streets to block those trucks. Now, some people say, well, they went on and dumped it anyway. Yes, but what happened? Because those 500 people who sacrificed themselves ignited a consciousness and awareness, not just in Warren County, but all over the world. To wit, the evolution of the environmental justice movement. Thank God for Warren County. Thank God for those, mainly, it was some brothers there, white and black, but it was mainly black women and children who came up out of the church. They were praying women. They were praying children. And they decided they were not going to let the state of North Carolina break their spirit. And so I say to you today in 2025, what are you letting break your spirit? What are you allowing to creep up into your mind that we're on an irreversible course, a downward spiral with no ability to say no to injustice publicly? And quite frankly, I understand why even the Democrats are a little silent. I understand that. When you face the forces of oppression, you have to decide, is it worth the risk? And if you don't remember anything I said all for today, remember this. Injustice does not change itself. Wrong does not change itself. The absence of truth does not find itself. So we need people who are at least willing to take the risk to stand up, speak out, and help raise up a new generation. Because when I got involved, there was a lot of young people. Dr. King was in his 20s. If you look at who was struggling in Birmingham, in Montgomery, you know, Rosa Parks was a young lady that refused to sit on the back of the bus. And so today, you know, I'm involved in a lot of things, including hip hop. Now, I see most of y'all don't go to the movies. I don't know if you've seen the movie Sinners. It's an interesting name, Sinners. But if I go to any young community here in Forsyth County or Charlotte or one of these communities, the young people, they don't know me from the Civil Rights Movement. They don't know me from the Wilmington 10. They don't know what I'm doing at Duke University right now. They know me from the movie Belly. You know, I was the minister in Belly. I see some of you shaking your heads. Because we live in a generation that's visual. There used to be the oral tradition, where we pass on from one generation to another that which was told. One of the reasons why I work with the black press, because I'm also concerned about what is written. James Baldwin and I were close friends, and before he passed, he said, Ben, the pen is mightier than the sword. So I want to ask y'all today, what y'all doing with your pens? What y'all writing? And what does what we write affect the consciousness of people so they can improve their quality of life? When COVID hit, all these pre-existing health conditions were exposed. The question is, where did all the pre-existing health conditions come from? Environmental exposure, climate exposure. 60% of all the children in Harlem have asthma, but they're not born with asthma. Poor air quality. And so part of what, and I'm going to discuss this with the dean, but I just want to say something. About 82, we had the demonstration in Warren County. People started calling from all over the country. By 86, Reagan as president, we could not just make an allegation about environmental injustice, so we did a study. United Church of Christ put up some money. We studied every zip code in America. And those of you who are data scientists, you know that once you get data, the question is, what do you ask of the data? And no one had ever asked, is there a correlation between race and environmental exposure in America? We got the answer. Race was the number one determinative factor in where toxic waste facilities were located, and where when there was a situation where communities had to be chosen, race was always the top factor in where these communities were targeted. So toxic waste and race was published. The EPA was in denial. They later developed an Office of Environmental Justice. Now I understand it was just closed. The reason why I'm giving this chronology, because by 1991, we had the first people of color leadership environmental summit in Washington, D.C. For the first time in American history, we invited indigenous, Native American leaders, Hispanic leaders, Asian American Pacific Island leaders, black leaders, and white leaders. For 3 days, we're huddling, discussing some debates. But at the end of the 3-day meeting, we came up with 17 principles of environmental justice. So part of the answer to where we go from here, we need to take another look of how to implement these principles and let these principles of environmental justice serve as a guide. It's just a guide of what we need to do. But I want to say to my indigenous brothers and sisters who are here, the first principle of the principles of environmental justice, affirm the sacredness of Mother Earth. I didn't say the importance. I said the sacredness of Mother Earth. So when you tamper with the soil of the earth, when you tamper with the water of the earth, when you tamper with the air of the earth, you're tampering with something that's sacred. And so that's why I'm optimistic. Because I do not believe that the God who created this wonderful world is going to allow a few greedy people to destroy it. And we need the majority of the people who are not greedy, not just to be a witness to what the greedy people are doing, but we'll call ourselves to organize, to mobilize. Thank God Almighty, what we did in Warren County in 1982 is now a global movement in the Caribbean, in Latin America, in Brazil, in Africa, in London, in Asia, all over the world. Started with one group here in Warren County, North Carolina. So, my dear brothers and sisters, thank you for allowing me to scream at you. I'm here with one of my daughters because I believe that we have to raise up a generation of freedom fighters. What I mean by that, I'm talking about a generation of people who are academics, people who are community leaders, people who are religious leaders. You know, we need a complexity of people to answer the complexity of the problems that we face. Interdisciplinary. So I wish the remainder of this conference well. I see it's been recorded. I don't know what's going to happen when it gets on social media. But I figured I better go ahead and tell you the truth today, and rather than to put it off or delay it. Sisters and brothers, we've come a mighty long way. We're not finished, but if you look at what has happened over the last 50 or 60 years, the very fact that we're at Wake Forest having this conference, come on. There was a time this would be impossible. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your vigilance. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to be with you. God bless you. Thank you.
Dr. Chavis, you've really given us not only a lesson in history and humility, but most importantly, you provided us with a lesson of hope and how you maintain hope in these times. I want us to move back to that earlier context. Before we can, as you justly stated, before we can move to where do we go from here, we have to understand the context of where we are today. And I want you to move us to the context of Warren County in that political moment. If we are remembering, of course, it starts in '78, but we're also in the age of Ronald Reagan comes into office. Ann Gorsuch is the first woman director of the EPA that was started under Richard Nixon in 1970. And Ann Gorsuch's son now serves on the Supreme Court. We have James Watt as Secretary of the Interior. So it was a moment where the environment was, for a young agency, a new young federal agency, was under assault, and yet here's a community organized and galvanized to actually fight for a human right, and not only for that community. Talk to us a bit about that context when you enter with the resources from United Church of Christ.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. I believe that the context of 1982, remember when Reagan became president, there was a kind of a shift in terms of America first, very similar to Trump. And while Reagan is considered one of the greatest American presidents, I would question that. Because what happened was, even though they had an EPA, the head of the EPA at that time was very much opposed to even using the phrase environmental justice or using the phrase, in fact, he had a press conference tonight. There's no such thing as environmental racism. Now, I don't want to put it all on the government, because the truth of the matter is, in 1982, the established environmental movement didn't see that as an environmental issue. The established civil rights movement did not see the environmental injustice as a civil rights matter. One of the benefits of what happened in Warren County, the established environmental movement and the established civil rights movement came together for the first time. This is what I'm talking about, having things interdisciplinary. We have to be careful how we self-isolate ourselves from a broader reality. You can't have social change from one angle. You need 360 degrees, if you excuse my geometry, of involvement. And that means there's a role for everybody. So what happened, Dean, is that from 1982 to 1986, that 4-year period, and that's why the United Church of Christ, again, had to put up some money to do this study. It was $100,000. In 1986, it's interesting. Research costs. I don't know why. You're searching for the truth. Why does research cost so much? People have to pay for the truth. Truth sets you free, but you got to have the money to pay for the truth to set you free. So thankful that the United Church of Christ put up this money. And we had to be very stewards of, we hired one of the best research firms in America. And I remember when we hired the firm, they said, "You sure you want to do this?" I said, "Yes." I'm thinking of Kendrick Lamar now at the Super Bowl. They're not like us. So, but the thing is, and then they said, "Well, only do these communities where you know environmental justice." I said, no. Because as you know, research does not stand up if it's not having peer review, or we know that people are going to come at us. So we had to do every zip code in America, including Alaska and Hawaii. That's why it cost so much. And the evidence was irrefutable. Most people thought that these hazards are because communities are poor. Poverty is a factor, but race turned out to be the number one factor. And of course, by that time, the Environmental Protection Agency began to accept that there was a problem based on race. Then Walter Fauntroy, who was in Congress at that time, he ordered a GAO study. And the GAO study confirmed what was in the Toxic Waste and Race report. So, I want to end on this point. All these studies came from grassroots activity. One of the challenges we have today, when the academy, the colleges and university, decides what they're going to research, a lot of times it skews what's going on in the community. For example, this is Wake Forest. I think Wake Forest should be inextricably linked with what's going on in the community in Forsyth County. I'm at Duke University now, and I tell Duke the same thing. You know, you just can't have an island of academic excellence, and then around that island contradicts what the research tells you, what the academics tells you. We have to have progress for all of humanity, not for some of humanity. So those are some of the broader contexts, Dean. It was a struggle. I mean, you know, by the time I became head of the NAACP in 1993, I convinced the NAACP to have an environmental justice program. Prior to then, they did not have an environmental justice program. Because again, the perception is that when you heard the word environment or you hear the word climate, it's just for a certain elite, upper, middle class white folks, hugging trees and trying to save bugs. It was a misperception. And on the environmental side, they thought that those of us in civil rights movement were just rabble-rousers, just trying to stir up stuff. Now, the head of the Sierra Club is Ben Jealous, former head of the NAACP. So, things do change, but it takes time. Social change does not happen overnight. It takes time. That's why you can't lose your optimism, you can't lose your hope because you don't win today. We're going to win. When we were saying we shall overcome in 1960, we were not overcoming, but we kept singing that song because one day we would overcome. We know one day if we kept pressing forward, change would be made.
You really draw on religion as a deep, rich resource in this movement. And we've had a conversation this morning where we looked at all the resources from the academy, resources from those local knowledges and communities. And you draw on the resources of religion to help animate, support, and sustain this movement. Would you talk to us a bit about how religion helped galvanize the community in Warren and also help provide vision, support, and infrastructure for what we saw in 1991 with the EEJI Summit Declaration with those 17 commitments?
Yeah, thank you. I believe confession is also good for the soul. And I confess then and confess now. While the church has done great work, it still has not done enough. And I'm going to go back to the transatlantic slave trade. The Roman Catholic Church was very heavily involved with sanctifying the transatlantic slave trade. If you go to some of the slave councils in West Africa, in Angola and other places, Senegal, Ghana and other places, you see on the top hill a little chapel. So the church blessed the slave boats before they left port. Didn't bless the slaves. Blessed the cargo would be safely reaching. And so, to me, by the I was involved with the Black Theology Project and Dr. James Cone. We were trying to, take the cross back. We felt that Jesus had been kidnapped, by the far right. So, but what we found out is that it's not a Christian thing. When I talk about religion, Dean, I'm talking about Christianity, I'm talking about Judaism, I'm talking about Islam. I'm also talking about traditional indigenous religion. I think that part of this world in which we live in, we've become judgmental of other religions, particularly those that predate the three religions. And if the leaders of the Roman Catholic Church were honest, I'm not saying they're dishonest, but a lot of the symbols and use the incense and all that's from traditional African religion, place of the drum. So my thing is, when I talk about religion, I try to do it in an inclusive way. So I'm not excluding somebody based on faith. My faith in God demands that I recognize the humanity of all people, not some people, not just the people in my church, not just the people in my denomination, or not just with the people who believe like me. I think the more we know about something other than what we are, the better we become. You know, and so my faith, my Christian faith has not been diminished. If anything, because even when I was a scientist, organic chemist, and I want to say this because I think also it's a false dichotomy between applied science and social science. Science is science. And I think a lot of times people reserve applied science as if it has some superiority over social science. And then the same thing, social scientists try to relegate applied scientists. But I think what we need, again, is that interdisciplinary approach. I think all of our healthcare professionals, when they tell you about the social implications of health today, you know, that is a concept that is emerging more and more and more. And we certainly support that. So to me, Dean, I think that what the church invested was the right thing to do. The National Council of Churches, the World Council of Churches. I was just at the United Nations last week about environmental justice and about people of African descent. So I think that there's plenty of opportunity. And I think the subject matter of this symposium, I'm hoping that whatever the results come out, that you widely publish it, that you widely distribute it. Because I think a lot of people would benefit from hearing, would benefit from listening, would benefit from grasping some of the topics that you've discussed on this symposium.
Well, that brings us to my final question for you. You really ended in an area where we're working with a number of journalists, particularly early career journalists, to become environmental journalists. And Melba Newsom, our coordinator, runs our our summer institute. This year we'll convene the institute in Washington, D.C. You're head of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. How do we leverage greater awareness of the issues and topics that are on the environmental justice agenda that have come up here, and also how to enhance public language and vocabulary around EEJI in our moment?
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that you're focusing on enhancing, developing, and encouraging environmental journalists. I think that's very, very important. Because again, what we write and what we distribute has impact. And we do need more environmental journalists. But to answer your question from a black press perspective, we definitely would like to work with you more. I wish we have 255 African-American owned newspapers in America, including the Winston-Salem Chronicle is here, the Charlotte Post, the Greensboro Peacemaker in Greensboro, the Carolinian in Raleigh. I mean, they're about, there are 10 different African-American owned newspapers in North Carolina across the state, including the paper in Asheville. But we would like to have some ongoing communication with the project that you're working on, because we probably could also recommend some candidates for you. And vice versa, once these journalists get trained, where they're going to work, where they're going to do their craft. And I think that that's something we should also discuss, is how to give further undergirding to the importance of environmental justice journalism. I think this is a cutting-edge subject. I would predict that over the next 5 to 10 years, more and more universities, more and more newsrooms, the few that we got left, will be dealing with the issues of climate, the issues of environment, from a much more holistic perspective, where people can actually see how they can help change their reality. See, it's one thing to report on something. It's another thing to report on something in a manner in which it engages people. And that's what we want. Not only to report the news, but to engage and also be an advocate for freedom, justice, and equality. All that can be done without violating the core principles of in journalism.
Dr. Chavis, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for taking time to come visit with us back in your home state.
Yes.
And thank you for continuing to be a bright voice and a true visionary, not only for us, but for all those who continue to join us in this journey.
Well, Dean, before, as you thank me, thank you. But I want to put this out. I would like for Duke Divinity School and Wake Forest Divinity School to be doing something together on this issue.
We got it.
Okay? Got you.
All right. Thank you so much. The Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis.
Thank you. Thank you.